I think a best place to start is tell us what we are doing here at the Common Sense, France.
Okay, we're sitting in the new media offices of the Common Sense. Now, the Common Sense is a media startup. It's a tech business in the main, so an enormous amount of effort has gone into engineering bespoke, extremely advanced large language models that we think will be the future of a lot of economic, political, and geostrategic analysis. And that's a lot of the interest here is to what extent can you take that technology in its present form to a point where it's able to do that kind of analysis. We just happen to be applying it in the form of a media startup. And so we're a tech business, firstly. Secondly, we're what we call a third space business. And the third space theory is a very interesting thing that people live in three spaces. The first space is their homes, and the second space is work. But there's a third space between those two places, and we want to be in that space where we provide very high quality information you can use to make decisions about your life, but also a sense of certainty, a sense of affirmation, a sense of reassurance about the nature of the world. One of our sort of central points of departure is that it is a great time to be alive in the world broadly and across much of the Western and the free world. And even in societies that aren't particularly free, living standards are just off the charts relative to anything that people have seen over the past several thousand years. So we want to stress that. And if you'd been in these offices over the past several months where we were setting this up, one of the things you'd have heard very often is we say to our colleagues, we want to stress the bridge issues that unite societies and unite the world and make it a good place. We don't want to do the opposite, which is to stress the wedge issues that have been so divisive in so many societies, including in South Africa, for a considerable period of time.
I think that there might be some kind of confusion that people have when it comes to what we're trying to do. Maybe I've heard people talk about kind of forced optimism or whatever. Like, what kind of anchors our claim at the CS that that life is good and that we should actually be focused on the positive and not focused on all of these kind of negative things in the way that other media organizations focus on.
Well, if you just do, this is exactly the problem. If you just do a cold clinical analysis of, let's use South Africa as an example, over the past 30 years, the view in the mainstream is that it's been a complete disaster. The country is a terrible place to live in. It's racked with worse poverty and unemployment and socioeconomic desperation than really at any point one would care to think of. It's deeply divided. People hate each other. We were just on the brink of some terrible detonation. Expand that idea into much of the Western world. The same is there, that Western societies are built on sort of pillars of exploitation and climate catastrophes and disasters. But what you could call doom-mongering has become the stock in trade of so many organizations in shaping opinions. Now let's take that back to South Africa. One of the things you hear is, it's been, the democracy's just been 30 years of jobless growth. I mean, that's just completely wrong on the facts of it. In fact, in the first 15 years or so of South Africa's democracy, the number of people in employment was doubled. But even if you lived through that era, what you would read in the press was that jobless growth. When Thabo Mbeki was removed as leader of the ANC and later of the country, one of the explanations for what happened to him was that South Africa, that had been the era of jobless growth over which he had presided. And this wasn't in the fringe world. This wasn't in the conspiracy theorists sort of realm. This was the mainstream view. And even in the present, we still confront that. I run an advisory company, and often when we come into a firm that's got either invested in South Africa, is considering that, the view is held of, and I know we're just dwelling on this jobless growth thing, we're going to go into some other points. The view is held as this jobless growth problem, this terrible jobless growth. We've never created any jobs. We have to throw away everything we've tried in the country for 30 years, reinvent the wheel. It's just completely nonsense. Completely wrong. We have a serious unemployment problem because we had very low rates of economic growth for the past decade. That's the problem. Let's go to something else, service delivery. If you read mainstream analyses again on South Africa, it failed completely. It's been a one rampant disaster after the other for 30 years. Woe be us. There must be few places in the world that could have confronted the collective catastrophes of service delivery that South Africa has. It is complete nonsense. On the first evening of South Africa's democracy, about half of families went to bed without electricity. Just more than a decade later, we'd brought that number down to below 20%. The facts of it are that there are very few emerging markets that can compare with the successes of service delivery that were recorded here in the immediate period after democracy. Take another indicator, housing delivery. There was massive urban migration at the end of apartheid. People came to cities in pursuit of a better life. We have not been overwhelmed on the macro data of it with shack settlements and the like. In fact, through that initial period, let's say the first decade after 1994, the country built 10 formal houses for every one shack that was newly erected. It was a record of extraordinary success in delivery. Go somewhere else, a violent crime, a terrible blight on South Africa. But if you go and do the cold, hard, clinical analysis, in the first year of South Africa's democracy, the murder rate, which measures what share of how many people are murdered in the country in a year for every 100,000 people present in the country, was 68. So 68 of every 100,000 people present in the country was murdered. 15 years later,
just on that point, what is the global average for murder?
15 years later, that figure had come down to 31. The global average remains a multiple of the South African figure. But the point is that violence and criminality did not get rampantly out of hand on the dawn of democracy, and no progress has subsequently been made. Considerable progress has been made in terms of securing South Africa's place as a society in which living standards are significantly higher than the mainstream thinking and analysis would broadly suggest. Take the best measure of progress is perhaps per capita GDP. South Africa's number climbed so steeply in the first 15 years after 94 that our figure as a relative to the global average was improving. And that was through the tail end of what was happening in some of the Asian tiger economies and the like. Or go to something like education, which is if you read the official record, also a catastrophic failure in every respect. Well, just before we became a democracy, I think the figure was that about 40 white kids were getting a degree in engineering. This is at the end of apartheid. For every one black kid that's getting an engineering degree. Today, the situation is that 2 black kids are getting an engineering degree for every one white kid, but the number of white kids is no lower than it was 30 years ago. So again, there is considerable progress that has been made. Now, none of that is to say that there aren't considerable problems that remain. They do. Obviously, they're well aired. We've aired them well over time as well. But the point is this: what kind of society is South Africa trying to build here from this point that we're at the moment? If the society we're trying to build is one of success and mutual prosperity for all our people, getting there requires just a proper factual understanding of where we were and where we currently are. Because if the view continues to be held that it has been one great disaster, we're going to get to democracy in a while, which is perhaps the greatest success, one great disaster over time, then it follows from there that we need to throw it all away. The experiment in democracy was a terrible mistake, and we should try something else. Our view, the alternative view, is that there is already so much that went right and was so successful that we do not need to do that. We do not need to reinvent anything. We need to go back to understand what it was that allowed the enormous world-beating progress, emerging market-leading progress that the country initially saw as it became a democracy. Learn the lessons from that. We already have a model that we know works. And if we pursue that model, then that is the way to build a prosperous society. But you're not going to get there if you instill a sense within the broader society that the collective efforts of all its people since that moment of trying to become a democracy has been an absolute failure. You will only get there if you're actually able to be honest enough to reflect on the fact that the collective efforts of all those people contributed at a macro scale an enormous amount to improving the basic living standards of so many South Africans in a material manner.